information in the description, and then once it posts, I put it in the description or in the comments. So it is u/horror_writer_1717 is his Reddit name. So let's get into this right now. Chapter 42. The warden's door swung open with such force that it slammed into the wall, and it cracked the window glass. "You cannot suspend me," a male roared as he marched up the warden's desk. "I am this prison. It doesn't exist without me." Warden Teff sat calmly behind the desk, despite the captain looming over him. Teff knew the captain was trying to draw him into a shouting match, but he refused to take the bait. You thought I was stupid," Teff said, narrowing his eyes. "You thought you could play me like a cheap violin. Well, the game is over." "What game?" Zorn said, feigning ignorance. "What are you talking about?" Teff was quietly amazed at this man's ability to deny everything. "I know everything, Nichols." Zorn blanched for a moment, then he smiled. "Prove it. You don't have anything. This is just a bluff, hoping I'll admit to something you know nothing about." "I have a large folder with your name on it," Teff said, tapping a folder on his desk. Zorn looked at the folder and then at Teff in a flash. He lunged forward, but Teff was quicker. He grabbed the folder and threw it to the floor with his left hand. In the same motion, he used his right to slam Zorn's head into the desk and dig his fingers into the nerve cluster behind the ear. Zorn screamed in pain and flailed helplessly as Teff grabbed Zorn's left wrist and yanked it up into the middle of his back. His face shoved into the desk. All he could do was blindly flail at air, hoping to get a hold on Teff. "Now," Teff grunted, "you are suspended pending criminal charges." Then he let him up. Emil sprang up and reached for his baton. Teff stood in a defensive stance but said nothing. He silently dared Emil to make a move. 3 sheriff's deputies burst in from the side room where they had been waiting. They grabbed Emil and cuffed him before he could react. He struggled, but they tased him and dragged him out. "Repairing that window will come out of your final paycheck," Teff yelled at Emil his martyrs killed in battle or sacrificing themselves for some great cause. They would have no idea that each picture was of some criminal who had been committed to murder, rape, assault, or even more grotesque crimes. Emil had to grit his teeth every time he looked out the window, which wasn't often. Judge Sawyer Bradley sat quietly in his study at 9:30 p.m. researching an obscure murder case, seeing if there was a legal precedent that might have been bearing in the Emil Soren trial. Sawyer was in his early 60s. He'd been a judge in Larson County for 32 years. He would have retired last year if his wife of 47 years hadn't up and died on him. Having nothing to look forward to, he just kept on working. He figured that one of these days he would just get tired of the nonsense and quit right in the middle of a trial. This Soren trial is shaping up as a good candidate for that very scenario. The judge pondered. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. He got up, jumped at the door, and ripped it open. "I thought I told you people no interviews." A stocky man in his mid-40s stood there surprised at the reception. "I'm sorry to disturb you. Is it late, Your Honor?" Sheriff Seacrest said. "Dead," Judge Bradley said, embarrassed. "I'm sorry. I thought you were one of those reporter poachers." "No, sir. May I come in? I need to talk to you." Of course. He ushered the sheriff into the sitting room. "Can I offer you a drink, a scotch or bourbon?" "Scotch or bourbon?" "No, sir. I'm still on duty." "Well, how about a beer then?" "A beer would be great." Not sure what the difference is, but... So, Bradley returned with a beer and a scotch for himself. "So what brings you to Larson to the outskirts of Larson?" "Emil Soren. I've heard that name way too much lately." "Has he done something else? Has he escaped?" No, nothing like that. It's just these damn reporters, they swarm all over the jail like bees on a honeycomb. They try to talk to him through the window. They try to sneak in to see him. But I nearly had to tase a reporter today because she refused to leave the jail without speaking to him. She said it was her constitutional right. So what happened? Let's just say you have a resisting arrest charge up next week on your docket." Bradley smiled. Bravo. It's just that every day they get a little closer, a little sneakier, a little bolder. "Is it a problem?" Bradley said, sipping his scotch. "That's not even mentioning the death threats from the victim's family. Ted said they hang out just behind the reporters constantly, being interviewed and making themselves more and more angry. They started throwing rocks at the jail last night. I wonder when they'll start throwing grenades." "So what are you saying? You're dead?" "Well, I'm no drinker. I know. I pull my weight around here. Absolutely. Did seem to deflate a little. I just don't think we can protect him much longer." "What would you have me do?" Move him out of county. Do a change of venue. Anything to get him tries to escape and is shot dead. That way I won't even have to hear this travesty. You're not serious. Oh, I'm dead serious, Bradley said. This monster has made a mockery of the justice system and did it believing he was 100% in the right. I want him dead before more of him or more like him pop up. And soon we have a country full of vigilantes administering their own justice without the law. The two men sat silent, nursing their drinks. Do you think that he did? Do you think what he did was right? Ted asked. The judge thought about it for a few minutes. The law says he was wrong, the judge said slowly. That is not what I asked you. Is this off the record? Ted looked hurt. Sir, when have any of our talks like this been on the record? You're right, of course, Bradley said, looking abashed. My apologies. So you believe he was right? I believe it's going to be a very interesting trial. Sensing that the conversation was over, Ted finished his beer and started toward the door. Thank you for the drink and the conversation. Anytime, Bradley said, walking him to the door. So you'll take care of the paperwork. I'll start it tonight. You can take him to the prison tomorrow. Thank you, Your Honor. You're welcome, Ted. Good night. Chapter 43. Where are you taking me? Emil said from the back seat of the squad car as they drove out of town. You'll see, Sheriff Seacrest said. 5 minutes later, they pulled into the parking lot of the Larson State Prison. Oh, hell no, Emil growled, struggling against his handcuffs and kicking the front seat. Look, the sheriff said, would you rather stay here and be isolated from everyone, or would you rather have reporters beating on your windows day and night? Emil paused. He hadn't slept much in the last few nights, mostly because of the media. Let me ask you, Sheriff, Emil said, if our roles were reversed, would you want your men to see you like this? Sheriff Seacrest appeared conflicted. Wait here, he said, leaving the deputy to guard Emil in the squad car. 30 minutes later, he came back to the car and they drove through the gate for processing. Warden Deff met them at the door and ushered them into the side room. Mr. Zorn, the warden said, good to see you again. Emil just glared at him, refusing to speak. The tension in the room was like a living thing, a storm cloud of rage waiting to burst. The sheriff cleared his throat. Mr. Zorn, he said, the warden has graciously agreed to some provisions due to the special circumstances of this case, such as, Emil said, without taking his eyes off Dev, housing you in the protective custody wing where you would have more privileges and access to the law library. And what would be the cost of this accommodation? Emil said, continuing to glare at the warden. Names, Dev said. I have several names for you, all with 4 letters, Emil said. The corner of Dev's mouth quivered into the slightest of grins in spite of himself. Cute. I was thinking more along the lines of officers involved with your little shadow gang. This time Emil's smile was as wide as the Cheshire's cat's. It haunts you, doesn't it? Emil said, knowing that my shadow gang is still here, invisible, waiting. How are officers in exchange for being housed with a bunch of child molesters. Essentially correct. I'd rather go to the home. That can be arranged. You better bring a lot of officers, Emil threatened. I thought that's what you would say, Tess said, nodding toward the sheriff. Emil felt a sting in his neck. His eyes became unfocused, and the room swam as he lost consciousness. When he awoke 2 hours later in the RHU cell, cell, Warden Teff was waiting at the door. Good morning, he said. I apologize for the tranquilizer, but I was protecting my officers. I know you understand that. Rage burned hot in Soren's eyes as he looked around his cell, searching for something to throw at the door. He spotted a small wooden desk and chair. I would not do that, Dev said, as if reading his thoughts. That desk and chair have been put in your cell as a courtesy. In the drawer are a pencil, a legal pad, and all your legal paperwork. If you destroy it, I will not replace it. You have to, Soren seethed. I don't, and I won't. Behave. Prepare your case, and you will be treated well. If you don't, you will be marched through this prison 3 times a day naked. You're bluffing. Dev leaned close to the door. You played me like a fool, disgraced your uniform, and murdered people for your own twisted pleasure. Dev said, you have no idea what I would do to you. They each held each other's gaze for a moment, then Tefton turned and strolled back to his office. Emil slowly walked to the desk, sat down, and pulled out the pad of paper out of his drawer. He stared at the yellow paper for a few minutes. After calming down and gathering his thoughts, he began to write. To Mr. Abel Williams, Attorney General. Dear Mr. Williams, I'm not sure if you remember me, so I will give you a brief reminder. Chapter 44. The courtroom was packed beyond capacity. It seemed that every family member of every inmate who had been hurt or killed at the Larson State Prison was in the courtroom. The sheriff had to call in every reserve deputy just to enforce courtroom security. Emil arrived at the back of the building and was treated to the side. The sight of dozens of reporters running around from the front screaming questions at him, tripping over each other's microphone cords, and yelling at their own camera operators to hurry up. It looked like a media version of Keystone Cops. Emil did everything he could to delay things so he could talk to the reporters, but the deputies were trying to drag him in before the media got there. Police brutality, he screamed towards the approaching reporters. I was drugged and held against my will at Larson State Prison. My constitutional right to a fair trial is being denied. They dragged him through the back door and slammed it shut. Pausing just inside the door, 5 deputies and the sheriff were all breathing hard. Soren, Sheriff Seacrest said, angry and out of breath. Did you ever read A Time to Kill? And Neil thought for a moment. No, but I saw the movie. Hated the ending. He should have fired. He should have fried. Well, if someone jumps out and points a gun at you, we will use you as a human shield, the sheriff said. So quit common sense or I swear I'll shoot you myself. Emil eyed him for a moment and then slowly walked forward, allowing himself to be ushered down the hallway towards the courtroom. He noticed how many doorways and blind corners there were in this courthouse. When Emil entered the courtroom, it resembled a professional wrestling match more than a trial. Cameras immediately began flashing in Emil's direction, and a loud chorus of boos, boo, seasoned with more than a few screaming expletives reverberated off the walls. As more people realized that Emil was in the room, the din grew even louder. Deputies trying to quiet people had their hands full and were quickly shouted down. No one heard the bailiff yell, "All rise," when the judge entered the courtroom. For this part, Judge Bailey was shocked when he stepped from his chambers. He actually looked at the brass plate on the door to make sure he was in the right place. Sure enough, it said Courtroom 1. He stepped through the doorway and paused to survey the sea of bodies. It looked like a combination of a rock concert and a soccer riot. The bailiff and 2 deputies stood between Emil and the crowd, forming a human wall. The noise was so deafening that no one could hear Judge Bailey banging his gavel and yelling for order. After 5 useless minutes of trying to calm the crowd, the judge caught Sheriff Seacrest's eye and motioned him up to the bench. After some brief instructions, which had to be shouted, the sheriff disappeared. He returned 5 minutes later and handed the judge a bullhorn. The judge turned on the siren and let it blare until everyone covered their ears. Finally, the room became quiet. I understand that this is an emotionally charged case, the judge said quietly so that the people had to strain to hear him. The judge turned on the siren and let it blare until everyone was covering their ears. Finally, the room became quiet. I understand this is an emotionally charged case, the judge said quietly, so that the people had to strain to hear him. But I simply will not stand for these outbursts. From this moment on, anyone other than me, the attorneys, or the witnesses who speak above a whisper will be removed from this courtroom. Is that understood? Murmurs of dissent echoed through the room. Quiet, the judge screamed, banging his gavel. Now if everyone will calm down and sit down, we can start this trial. Is everyone ready? Nods all around from prosecution, defense, and jury. Docket number 131717. The people versus Emil Sorn. Mr. Sorn, please stand. The judge's gavel quickly silenced muffled boos. Mr. Sorn, you have been accused of the following charges: 5 counts of first-degree murder, 55 counts of second-degree murder, 381 counts of conspiracy to commit murder, 322 counts of attempted murder, 381 counts of aggravated assault, 55 counts of manslaughter, 381 counts of assault with a deadly weapon, 381 counts of assault and battery. How do you plead? Not guilty. Emil announced. The courtroom exploded with screams of defiance. People case office rose and straightened his expensive tie. He had begged, bribed, and pulled every string he could get to get this case. Everyone told him not to take such a high-profile case for his first jury trial. They warned him to get a little seasoning first. He used to get used to the courtroom and how to talk to a jury. Larry ignored them, of course. He had stars in his eyes. The case was widely known to be an easy win, and Larry wanted to start his career looking like a hero. Kinsinger flashed his best smile and winked at the defense attorney. Otis Lafferty was in his mid-40s, short, balding, but well-built and charismatic. When he hadn't chosen to be for a long time. He had been the public defender in Larson for over 20 years. He had long ago lost his passion for his occupation. This Emil Zorn case, however, presented him with a unique situation. He believed Emil was guilty as sin. In Otis's mind, he had two choices: defend him so poorly that he would be removed from the case, or defend the case so well that it got Emil off scot-free, proving that what a great litigator he was, and setting himself up to run for judge when Bradley finally retired. The problem was, with option 2, was that the people of Larson didn't want Emil set free. They wanted him to fry. You see, so defense, call your first witness, Bradley said. The defense calls Emil Zorn, Lafferty said. Emil strode to the witness chair. There the bailiff presented a Bible, and Emil placed his right hand on it. Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? I do, Emil said. Be seated. Be seated. Mr. Zorn, how long have you worked at Larson Prison? 17 years. And in that time, have you ever had to deal with an incident where an inmate assaulted another inmate? Many times. And why do they assault each other? Well, could be any reason. Gang rivalry, failure to repay a debt, lovers' quarrel. This brought a rumble of chuckles from the jury. Order, the judge said. The jury quieted and Lafferty continued. And did any of these incidents result in injury to one or more inmates? Most of the time, yes. Where would these inmates Yes, Your Honor, Kinsinger said, approaching the stand. So, Mr. Zorn, how many people have you killed? The defense attorney leaped out of his chair like he was sitting on a spring. Objection. Sustained, Judge Bradley said. All right, Mr. Zorn, how many people have you injured? Kinsinger said without missing a beat. Objection. Sustained, the judge said. Mr. Kinsinger approached the bench. The judge leaned forward and so that the only attorney could hear. I know you think you're some big shot rookie lawyer from the big city, and we are just some bunch of country bumpkins out here. But I assure you, we know the law. So build your case the way you're supposed to, or I will remove you from it. Is this understood? Yes, sir. Kinsinger walked slowly back to the witness stand, gathered his thoughts, and started over. Mr. Zorn, are you familiar with the name Frank Carson? Zorn flinched. Oh, yeah, I have heard of it, yes. You've heard of it. Isn't that the name of the man who murdered your father in cold blood? Yes. Have you ever visited the Larson Cemetery? Once or twice. Really, Kinsinger said. Isn't that where your father is buried? Yes. The father that you loved so dearly and mourned for so long. Your point, Zorn said. Don't you visit two graves every year on the same day? Zorn sat motionless, refusing to answer. Don't you visit your father and then visit Frank Carson? Zorn pretended not to hear him. Don't you go to Frank Carson's tombstone every year just to urinate on it? No response. Kinsinger leaned close. I bet it bothers you that Frank died so quick before you could get him in your little torture chamber. Objection. Sustained. Let's move on to another name. Kinsinger said, nonplussed. Dustin Brenly. Ring any bells? One or two, Zorn said. His face began to flash. One or two. The man who raped your wife. I'm sorry, ex-wife. Didn't that make you even a little bit angry? Maybe, Zorn said, trying to remain composed. How about Anthony Morelli? Morelli was self-defense. Zorn screamed, jumping to his feet. Order, Bradley said, banging his gavel. Sit down, Mr. Zorn. Yes, sir. Mr. Kinsinger, bring this line of questioning to a point quickly. Just one more name, Mr. Zorn. Kinsinger said, Raymond Barry. Zorn sat quietly, trying to look impassive. No answer, Kinsinger said. I didn't think so. All of these are names of people who are dead. In each of these cases, Mr. Zorn was involved. None of these cases went to trial until today. Zorn shifted uncomfortably in his seat. How is that even possible? Kinsinger asked Zorn. 4 wrongful deaths, not one trial. It appears you have great deal of influence, Mr. Zorn. Objection. Sustained. Judge Brad punishment for assaulting an officer is a slightly smaller cell, and you don't get to go to church. Essentially, yes. Do they receive any physical punishment? No. Thank you, Mr. Zorn. No further questions. Chapter 46. Chapter 46. Prosecution calls Alice McGregor Zorn. Alice sauntered up to the witness chair. Even in her business suit, her curves still drew attention. Several of the male jurors felt the temperature in this room suddenly rise a few degrees. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? The bailiff said. Yes. Be seated. Mrs. Zorn. The prosecutor began. It's Miss McGregor. She interrupted. Excuse me. Kinzinger said. Miss McGregor, how did you first meet the defendant? At work. And how long were you married to Mr. Zorn? 6 months. 6 months, he repeated. That doesn't seem like a very long time. No, sir, it doesn't, she said, looking at Emile sadly. So in the time you were married to Mr. Zorn, did you ever see him do anything improper at work? Improper? You mean at work? Yes, ma'am. She had thought for a long moment. Define improper. Kinzinger rolled his eyes. Anything that was against the rules of anything of questionable morality, anything that just did not seem right. Alice started to laugh. Have you ever been inside a prison? She asked Kinzinger. No, ma'am, just answer the question, please. Corrections is like no other profession. We have to deal with the lowest of the low, the people society doesn't want to deal with or know about, and we have to do it professionally, even when we are treated very unprofessionally, when we get spit on, beaten, raped, killed. We have to be professional. That is correct, Kinzinger said. So did you ever see Mr. Zorn act unprofessionally? She looked at Emile, who seemed to just have the slightest of grins tugging at the corner of his mouth. Your Honor, do I have to answer that question? She asked. Can I invoke my Fifth Amendment rights? Would your answer incriminate you? Judge Bradley asked. She thought about it for a long moment. No, I don't think so. Then you have to answer the question. And what if I don't? Then I could hold you in contempt of court and send you to jail for an unspecified length of time. I understand, she said. She stared at Emile for a long time. It seems as though they were having a mental conversation. One no one else was privy to. Finally, Kinzinger cleared his throat. Well, Mrs. McGregor, he said, did you ever see Mr. Zorn act unprofessionally? No, she answered quickly and empathetically. It was the last thing Kinzinger expected to hear. You realize that you're under oath? Yes, I do, she said confidently, and I have answered your question. May I go now? Kinzinger was just frustrated enough that he was about to let her go. Then a thought occurred to him. Did you ever hear of Mr. Zorn acting unprofessional? He asked. She shifted in her seat but did not answer. Objection, Your Honor, Lafferty said. Hold on, Judge Bradley said. I want to hear this. Kinzinger smiled. Miss McGregor, he said with sickly sweetness. She hung her head. She hung her head. Yes, she said barely audibly. I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you. I said yes, I have heard sorry, you mean Mr. Zorn told you himself that he was going to kill an inmate? No, that he had already done it. Kissinger was far more surprised than he let on. Oh, and who was this inmate? Dustin Brenly. Kissinger turned towards Zorn and said, "Ding, ding." Zorn nearly flew over the table at him and had to be restrained. "All right, Counselor, you've made your point. Move on," Bradley said. "Oh, thank you, Miss McGregor. You're excused." Prosecution calls Mr. Alfred Tansey. Tansey walked to the witness stand and was sworn in. "Mr. Tansey, how long were you the warden at Larson Prison?" Kissinger began. 5 years, and during your tenure as warden, did Mr. Zorn serve at any supervisory role? Yes, he was a sergeant, and then I arrived and became captain just before I left. Wait a minute, Kissinger said, looking confused. Sergeant to captain? That's quite a promotion. What happened to lieutenant? Mr. Zorn had been passed over for promotion several times through a series of oversights, and you felt it was time to even things out. Kissinger said, settle the score, as it were. Yes, that's correct. Was the only score you were settling? Excuse me, Tansey said. What is your relationship with Miss Alice McGregor Zorn? Kissinger said, ignoring Tansey's comment. I have no relationship with Miss Zorn. Did you have one in the past? Tansey hesitated, looked over at Emil, and then finally answered, yes. And was this relationship while Miss Zorn was married? No. Before or after? After. And how long did this relationship go on? About 3 months. Did it become physical? Meaning, did you have sex with Miss Zorn? Your Honor, Tansey said, do I have to answer that? Mr. Kissinger, Judge Bradley said, is there a point to this line of questioning? Yes, sir. We'll get to it quickly. Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Tansey, Bradley said, please answer the question. Tansey looked over at Emil and slowly lowered his head slightly. He said, yes. So you were in a physical relationship, Kissinger said, and you deeply cared for her? Yes. Deeply enough to protect her? Yes, of course. During your relationship, did anything dramatic happen to her? She was raped. Oh my, Kissinger said in mock horror. That must have been terrible. Who was it who raped her? Dustin Brenly. The same Dustin Brenly who was an inmate at Larson Prison. Yes. How did you handle that? I investigated, and Mr. Brenly put in RIGU and filed criminal charges. And that's all you did? What else was there to do between you and me? Kissinger said, if the two of them were the only ones in the room, I would have beaten the hell out of the guy. Well, I'm not allowed to do that, Tansey answered stiffly. What happened to Mr. Brenly? Kissinger said. Did he go to trial for this? No, he fell ill and passed away. And how long was this after Mr. Brenly raped Miss Zorn? About 2 weeks. And did Mr. Zorn have access to Brenly? Yes. How long after Mr. Brenly's death was Mr. Zorn promoted to captain? Around 10 days. And how long after that did you retire? About 3 weeks. Kissinger took a deep breath, then slowly walked over to the jury box and addressed the jury. So let's recap, he said. You exchange for promotion. Kinchinger said slowly. Your Honor, Tansy said, I would like to invoke my Fifth Amendment right and not answer that on grounds that it may incriminate me. You have that right, Bradley said. You don't have to answer. Instead of being disappointed, Mr. Kinchinger actually wore a smile. He walked back to the jury box and said, Thank you, Mr. Tansy. You have told us all we need to know. Walking towards his seat, strutting like a conquering hero, Kinzinger leaned over to Lafferty and said, Your witness. Lafferty slowly got up and made his way to the witness stand. Mr. Tansy, he said, I know that the prosecutor has been very hard on you, and I assure you that I will not take such a toll. In fact, I only have 3 very simple questions. Tansy visibly relaxed. Okay. Mr. Tansy, did you ever see Emil Zorn do anything physical harm to Dustin Brenly? No, I did not. Did you ever give Emil Zorn a direct order to harm Dustin Brenly in any way? No. Last question, Lafferty said. Before this trial, was Emil Zorn ever charged with Dustin Brenly's death? No. I have no further questions. Thank you for your time. Lafferty turned to and shot a brief grin at Kissinger. For his part, Kissinger did a remarkable job of looking impassive, but he inside was seething. He knew that he had built an amazing argument, the best argument he had ever built, and yet, with 3 little questions, it was all falling apart, like the hidden Hindenburg going down in flames. Do you have any more questions for this witness? Bradley asked Kissinger. No, Your Honor. Then the witness is excused, and we will take a recess for lunch, Bradley said, banging his gavel. The courtroom quickly cleared. In minutes, the only ones remaining were Lafferty and Kissinger, brooding. Go ahead and gloat, he said, without looking at Lafferty. For what? Lafferty said, looking genuinely surprised. You won that round, Kissinger said. You took my best shot and turned it back on me. It wasn't easy, though, Lafferty said. You presented one hell of an argument. Thanks, but it wasn't enough. Come on, kid, Lafferty said. I'll buy you lunch. I'll buy you lunch. Chapter 47. Later that day, the trial continued. Prosecution calls Ryan Colton shuffled into the courtroom wearing cuffs, shackles, and a cheap suit that the prison kept on hand for inmates to borrow for trial. He was seated and sworn in. Even in chains and a bad suit, he still had a regal air about him, as if nothing could keep him down. Kissinger hated him immediately. Mr. Colton, Kissinger said, did you share a cell in Larson's state prison with an inmate named Raymond Perry? Yes, sir, I did. And what happened to him? He died, Colton said, his face impassive, showing none of the emotions that were simmering just beneath the surface. And how did he die? Colton hesitated. I was not a direct witness, therefore any opinion I state would be merely hearsay and inadmissible. Kissinger hated him a little more. I understand that, he said. Please refrain from telling me how to do my job and answer the damn question. Very well, Colton said. I believed he was killed in a one-on-one. Objection sustained. Colton raised an eyebrow, giving Kissinger an odd I told you so look. Kissinger swallowed his anger and continued. So, what is a one-on-one? It is a program designed by Mr. Zorn in which inmates are beaten to submission by their victims. Objection, Lafferty said. How does an inmate know what was designed by Mr. Zorn? Mr. Colton, Judge Bradley said. How do you know if Mr. Zorn designed some elaborate torture system? Because I helped him design it. The courtroom went silent. If the judge had stripped naked, jumped up on his desk, and started dancing, there would have been less of a reaction. The only two who were not Soren was a student in my criminal justice class. I begun to teach on alternative rehabilitation and techniques in prisons. Mr. Soren came up with the theory that the victim should be allowed to return harm to their attackers. I was intrigued by the concept and suggested that he write a paper on it. As he wrote it, he consulted me with several times. Lafferty stood and cleared his throat. Your Honor, the witness's rights, he said, trying to be as humble as possible. Oh yes, Bradley said. Mr. Colton, I must inform you that by stating you assisted someone who is on trial, you may end up being charged as an accessory. I understand, Colton said. And do you wish to continue with your testimony? Yes, sir. Well then, continue, counselor. Let's talk about one-on-one, Kissinger said. What is it that happens at one-on-one? Objection, Lafferty said. How do we know this is one-on-one even exists? This is all hearsay. I'll change my question, Your Honor, Kissinger said. Mr. Colton, what was involved in the concept that you and Mr. Soren designed? If I have an inmate acting up that was difficult to control, I would call the inmate's victim or the victim's family. They would be offered the opportunity for some retribution with a guarantee of no charges and no witnesses. What type of retribution? Physical with a little psychological thrown in for good measure, such as the victim using the same weapon they had been attacked with. Sounds interesting, Kissinger said. Has it been effective? Let me put it this way, Colton said. Since Mr. Soren became captain, Larson has gone from one of the loudest prisons with the most in-house crime to the quietest with the least. And how do you know that? I talk to people, inmates, officers, visitors, whoever I can. So everything you've just said, we're just going on your word. I suppose so. Just one more question, Kissinger said. What are you in prison for? Murder. No more further questions. Mr. Colton, Lafferty started. Did you ever get taken to a one-on-one? Yes. And what victim came to accost you? Mr. Soren. Did he assault you? No. Did he threaten you? No, not directly, no. Then what did he do? Interviewed me. Why? My cellmate had just escaped and he wanted to find out where he was going so he could get him back. Who is your cellmate? Raymond Perry. So you say inmates were assaulted at one-on-ones and yet that didn't happen to you. Why not? Well, I can think of two reasons, Colton said. One is mutual respect. Mr. Soren recognized me the first time he saw me in Larson and has never given me a hard time. And what's the other reason? Lafferty asked. I told him what he wanted to know, and I never gave him a hard time. There was no reason to assault me. You mentioned mutual respect. Do you respect Mr. Soren? Absolutely. Lafferty sensed that he was playing with dynamite and had made his point already. No further questions, Your Honor. Just as the judge was about to excuse the witness, Kissinger jumped up. Your Honor, I have one more question for the witness. Proceed, he said impatiently. Mr. Colton, you said you respect Mr. Soren. Why? Colton thought for a moment. Most of it is pride. Pride as a student, being able to see an idea from concept to completion. That's a lot rarer than you think. So you believe in Mr. Soren's theory of torturing inmates? Objection. We have established that it is Mr. Soren's theory, and we've established that it is torture, Kissinger said to the judge. Overruled. This time Kissinger flashed a smile at Lafferty. Mr. Colton, Kissinger said. Yes, I believe in Mr. Soren's theory. I believe that some people deserve to be punished more severely for their heinous crimes they commit. And what makes you think that? Because I deserve it. So you want to be tortured, Kissinger said, incredulously. I deserve it for my crime. course not to be tortured, Kissinger said thoughtfully. Possibly. No further questions, Kissinger said. Mr. Lafferty, the judge said. No, I'm done. Then we'll adjourn for the day. Chapter 48. The following day resumed bright and early. The sun had just risen and it was going to be a glorious day outside. The jurors groaned as they were herded into the courtroom. Each one had someone elsewhere they'd rather be. Judge Bradley, seemed to have lost a step or two as he entered the courtroom and took his seat. Does the defense plan on calling any witnesses on its behalf? Judge Bradley asked. Your Honor, Lafferty said, we believe it is the prosecution's job to prove guilt, and in my opinion, Mr. Kissinger has done nothing of the kind. In fact, the defense has to wonder if the prosecution is going to continue to serve us a die consisting of only circumstantial and outdated evidence, expecting us to swallow it. Kissinger winced, knowing Lafferty was right. He silently weighed his options. Your Honor, Kissinger said, I have one further witness to call. However, I request a recess to discuss the circumstances. Bradley glared at Kissinger, but he refused to flinch. Very well, 15-minute recess. Once in the judge's chambers, Lafferty came unglued. What the hell is this? You didn't have any more witnesses on your list. That's why it's called a surprise witness. I would think that an old-timer like you would know that. Lafferty was livid. He knew he had this trial all sewn up, and this snot-nosed little attorney was cheating. Enough, Bradley said. I'm tired of this trial. I want it over. I swear, Your Honor, this is my last witness, Kissinger said. Bradley eyed him. All right, Bradley said. I'll allow it, Your Honor. Lafferty squealed, but the judge silenced him by raising his hand. Let me warn you, Mr. Kissinger, Bradley said. If this is some smoke and mirrors ploy, you can consider yourself in contempt of court right now. It's not, Your Honor. However, I am requesting of you special allowances. Bradley drained his glass, such as the courtroom was cleared of all media and cameras. The jury was given special instructions in the trial resumed. With the prosecution called its final witness, Judge Bradley said strongly, emphasizing the word final. Prosecution calls Harley Richardson. Harley walked in wearing a dark suit, tie, hair trimmed and styled, looking like a professional detective. If looks could kill, he would have dropped dead as soon as Emil saw him. Harley sat, adjusted his suit, and was sworn in. Mr. Richardson, Kissinger began. What is your profession? Richardson shuffled in his seat and cast a nervous glance at the jury. Don't worry, Mr. Richardson, they have already been informed, Kissinger said. It's just for the record. Richardson visibly relaxed. I am a police officer, he said. And how long have you been a police officer? 19 years. And have you ever worked undercover? Countless times. During an undercover investigation, have you ever been assaulted? Yes, sir, several times. And what did you do? I filed charges against the perpetrator. Lafferty began to have a quiet but animated discussion with Emil as Kissinger continued his questioning. Did you recently undertake an undercover assignment inside Larson Prison? Kissinger asked Richardson. Yes, I did. And what happened? I was threatened and assaulted by another inmate. No, by Emil Zorn. Objection, Lafferty yelled as he shot out of his chair. On what grounds? Lafferty floundered. He started rifling through the papers as though the answer would magically appear. Kissinger watched in sheer enjoyment. He had to fight the urge to smile. Well, Bradley said. Lafferty's shoulders slumped. Objection withdrawn, he said quietly, such a thing, Kissinger said, feigning indignation. Emil Sorn and 2 other officers. Did they say anything? Kissinger asked. Did they give you any indication as to why they were brutally beating you? Because I was teasing Mr. Sorn. I'm sorry, did you say? Because you were teasing him. I was calling by his first name, Richardson said. He does not like that. And what did he assault you with? His fists? No, a nightstick. So let me get this straight, Kissinger said. Emil Sorn beat you with a hardened wooden club because you called him by his first name. Yes, sir. What more needs to be said, Kissinger said to the jury. Pure brutality. Your witness, counselor. Lafferty had been furiously scribbling notes on a pad and barely heard the prosecutor. He did not rise right away. Counselor, the judge said. Just 1 moment, Your Honor. Do you need a recess? Bradley asked. No, Your Honor, he said, finishing his frantic notes. Then he rose and approached the witness. Mr. Richardson, you say you have been assaulted before in the line of duty? Yes, sir. In these previous instances, have you identified yourself as a police officer before you were assaulted? Yes, I believe so, sir. Did you identify yourself to Mr. Sorn? I'm not sure I understand the question. Did you tell Emil Sorn that you were an undercover police officer before the alleged assault? Well, no, sir. Don't you think that would have been prudent? No, sir, I was investigating reports of brutality. So you went looking for brutality in a prison, and when you didn't find any, you began antagonizing Captain Sorn, hoping to frame him. Well, that's not the way it... How many witnesses were there to this so-called assault? 3, including Mr. Sorn. Yes. If I put Mr. Sorn back on the stand, do you think he would agree with you as assessment of this incident? Hurley looked over at Emil with resignation. It's hard to tell what he thinks anymore, he said. Oh, that's right, Lafferty said, brightening. I forgot that you went to school with Mr. Sorn. That's correct, sir. And how would you describe your relationship with Mr. Sorn during your school years? I would say friendly. Friendly, Lafferty said. You mean the 2 of you got along? Yes, I'd say we got along fairly well. So you never teased him back then, Lafferty said. Never goaded him into a fight, never beat him up. Yes, Richardson said, hanging his head. I was a bully in school, but Mr. Sorn broke you of that, didn't he? Yes, but the same way Mr. Sorn tried to break you of being a belligerent inmate by pulling you aside and talking to you. You mean talking with a wooden club? Who witnessed it? No one who's going to take my side, Richardson said, getting agitated. Have you ever been investigated by Internal Affairs? Lafferty asked. Richardson paused. Every officer has one time or another. I'm not asking about other officers, Lafferty said. I'm asking about you. Well, after a long pause, Richardson sighed. Yes. Yes, what? Yes, I have been investigated by Internal Affairs. For what? None of your business, Richardson snapped. Objection, Your Honor, Kissinger said. Is this pertinent? Judge Bradley pondered for a long moment. The witness will answer the question, he said. Falsifying reports, Richardson said quietly. I'm sorry, I could not hear you, Lafferty said. I was investigated for falsifying reports, Richardson spat at Lafferty, but I was acquitted. I have no more questions for this non-credible witness, Lafferty said, turning and walking back to his desk. You're excused. If I may, Your Honor, Kissinger said, jumping out of his seat. The judge nodded. Officer Richardson, he said, emphasizing the word officer. Have you ever been charged with conduct unbecoming? No, sir. Have you ever been charged with any crime? No, sir. No further questions. You may be excused. Thank you for your time. Chapter 49. After recess, the judge sure that both parties were ready before beginning closing arguments. "The defense may begin," Judge Bradley said. Lafferty rose and approached the jury box. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, in closing, I would like to do a little demonstration for you. I have here 2 baseballs," he said, handing them to the foreman. "One is written the word justice." As the jury members each examined the baseball, they will see that the only marking on this ball is the official seal of approval for Major League Baseball. Now I have another baseball which I will hand to the foreman to pass around. As you can see, this ball has only one word, revenge, on it, with no other markings. Other than the markings, these balls are identical. They feel the same, they weigh the same, they look the same. In fact, the only real difference is the seal of approval on one ball and not the other. Pausing, Lafferty gathered his thoughts. Let's say my wife is out walking late one night and a man grabs her, drags her into an alley and kills her. If I go out and hunt this man down and kill him, it's called revenge, and I will go to prison for it. Now if the police catch him, put him in jail, and after years of trials decide he deserves the electric chair, it's called justice. Do any of the jurors go to jail for it? Does the judge? No. Why not? Because they have the seal of approval stamped on their ball. The judicial system, justice and revenge are the same thing. The only difference is that one is called legal and the other is not. My client took initiative to right some wrongs, and the only reason he is sitting in this courtroom today in front of you is because he didn't have the seal of approval. Lafferty walked away slowly back to his seat. Kissinger got up and carried a large legal book. He walked to the jury box while I was still reading. My colleague has given an impassioned argument, he said without raising his eyes. Even if it's wrong, I cannot find any legal precedent where revenge is used to justify murder. However, right here, he said, holding up the book, it says that murder is illegal. So let's define murder. Murder is the willful act of taking another one's life. It doesn't matter how you twist it or turn it and try to justify it. Murder is still murder. That is why Emil Zorn is still here today, is sitting here today, in this seat in front of you all, not because he is some superhero as the defense would have you believe, running around in tights dispensing justice, but because he committed murder. Not once, but several times. Kissinger slammed the book book shut and went back to his seat. The jury room was the prison of the courtroom. The jury room was the prison of the courtroom. Someplace no one wanted to be. The jury room was hell. Then the Emil Zorn jury room was like jet fuel and battery acid raining in hell. Debates raged endlessly, mostly on the difference between what was right and what was legal. Alliances form, heated discussion, bribes, threats, the norm, For 9 days they ranted, raved, and rebutted. Finally, on day 10, they managed a verdict somehow. Somehow the media found out and immediately began crowding into the courtroom, followed closely behind the families and hang-on attorneys. When the judge entered the courtroom, he had a flashback of the first day of his trial. Ladies and gentlemen, I appreciate your attendance. I understand this has been a long process, but in the end, justice will be served. The crowd gave a polite applause. I'm counting on each and every one of you, he said, to remain calm. Remain calm, no matter what the verdict is. I have already shown that I'm not afraid of clearing this courtroom. Please don't make me do it again. Murmurs and assenting nods ran through the courtroom as the judge took his seat. 10 days of hell did wonders for the jury's poker faces. words were unreadable. They were just glad it was almost over. Well, as the jury reached a verdict, we have, Your Honor. The courtroom held its breath collectively as the foreman stood and handed the paper to the bailiff, who handed it to the judge. Looking down at the paper, he cleaned his glasses, took a drink of water, handed it back to the foreman. "Mr. Zorn, please rise," Bradley said, clearing his throat. "We, the jury, find Mr. Zorn not guilty." An eruption, like a hand grenade in a dynamite factory, came from the crowd. The judge screamed, his voice hoarse, and broke two gavels trying to get order. Every bailiff and deputy tried to keep the room from becoming a full riot. Chapter 50. The courtroom was in shambles, desks overturned, chair thrown through a window. Judge Bradley stood behind his desk, looking over the carnage, thinking, "I should be on a fishing boat in Florida right now, catching more beers than fish." Collapsing into his chair, blowed a heavy sigh. His mind was already made up. This would be his last case. Instead of taking a nice long walk through the courtroom and reminiscing, all he could do was stare at the destruction because of one man. Emil Zorn had not helped the matter. When the riot began, he stood and started blowing kisses to the crowd, like he was some celebrity. Anyone who tried to attack him made a major mistake. Even handcuffed and shackled, he took on several attackers and screamed challenges for more. He had to be tased and dragged into the room on the side of the courtroom. Once he recovered, his attorney came in to talk to him. "You cannot cuff me now." "For what?" Lafferty said. "Didn't you hear the jury? I'm innocent." Lafferty suppressed a chuckle. "There's a lot of things you are, but none of them are innocent. They said not guilty. We did not hear all the charges. They have to declare you guilty or not on each charge." "What?" Emil screamed, suddenly on his feet. "They can't do that. They said not guilty. I heard them." "Emil, look, you need to focus," Lafferty said. "Focus on what?" "Making sure the electric chair is plugged in. You need to calm down and let me do my job." Emil stopped and glared at him. "Who do you think you are?" Emil said, focusing his eyes with a piercing stare. "I think I'm the guy who's been cleaning up your messes. I think I'm the guy who just might have saved your ass from frying in the electric chair." Emil glared at him. "Wait a minute, I remember you. It's been bothering me the whole trial. I knew you. You're the SOB that got that murdering piece of trash McLean back on the streets on a technicality." Emil moved uncomfortably close to the lawyer. "How did it feel when he started killing again? When he abducted that young boy and skinned him alive? How did you feel knowing you were responsible?" Lafferty couldn't decide which was disturbing him more. Emil slowly advancing on him like a stalking lion at the turn of the conversation had taken. He sat in silence, unreactive. "How did you feel when he took that woman who was pregnant and got out?" "Enough!" Lafferty yelled. Emil smiled like a cat toying with the mouse. "Don't worry, I'll finish the job you started." "I did finish the job you started. He won't be bothering you anymore. Or anyone else." Lafferty glared at him in disgust. "You're a monster." Emil's Cheshire cat smile broadened. "Why, counselor? How judgmental of you. Whatever happened to innocent until proven guilty? That's not very professional of you. Besides, I'm not the monster. I keep the monsters off the street." "I'm a freaking hero and you're fired." 5 hours later, Emil sat once again at the defendant's seats, aside from the judge, jury, and prosecution, and the room was empty. "Mr. Zorn, please rise," Judge Bradley said, slurring his speech a tiny bit. "Foreman, please read the verdict again." "Yes, Your Honor," he said, standing up. "The jury finds that fresh out of law school with unbounded work ethic, unyielding political idealist, Abel quickly climbed up the professional ladder. When he got to that level, his ambitions magnified. He even considered himself a candidate for the Oval Office. His office walls were covered with pictures of him shaking hands with celebrities, senators, congressmen, even an odd president or two. He constantly crusaded against the unfair treatment of the elderly gays and inmates. Often he would be seen to be preaching instead of speak on the evils of right-wing extremists, gay bashing, and the death penalty. He's on the fast track to political advancement, and all he was doing, all he could do to speed up the train. Then came the day his 9-year-old daughter was kidnapped. But those in the know knew that she had been tortured and raped. When they caught the man, the trial was quick, quiet, and severe. He got 3 consecutive life sentences. Because for Abel to pull strings to get the death penalty would go against one of his strongest beliefs. The man's name was never released, and he was quickly taken to an unnamed prison to serve a sentence. Abel and his wife tried for years to help their little girl recover. They took her to the best therapists, doctors, and psychologists, but she was never the same. The one thing that made him feel a little better was the one thing that he was most ashamed of. 2 years after the incident, he rode the sympathy vote right into his Senate seat. It was a beautiful spring day. Drove his Cadillac STS to work. Driving down Pennsylvania Avenue, he opened his window to breathe in the smell of cherry blossoms. He pulled into his building, passed through security, parked his car, and made his way to his office. His secretary, attractive, intelligent woman, late 20s, ambitious, wanting to advance her own career. Yes, she greeted Abel in a warm yet businesslike manner that showed no sign of the affair they were having. "Good morning, sir. I have your mail sorted on your desk. Here are your phone messages, and you have a 12 o'clock lunch scheduled with Senator Graham." "Okay, thank you, Miss Newell." "My pleasure, sir." As he entered his office, he sat down in his comfortable leather chair, exhaled deeply. He was exactly where he wanted to be, but it had come at a terrible price. He's shaking off the thoughts of his daughter being tortured. He looked at the pile of mail, of correspondence in his box. The name on the return address caught his eye, and his breath caught in his throat. He hoped he would never encounter that name again. He began to throw it in the trash and thought better of it. He started to read it, and halfway through he crumpled the pages and sat seething, trying to regain his composure, the letter a hard ball in his fist. At last his anger bled away, replaced by an emotion he hadn't embraced in a long, long time. Fear. Fear. He was so deep in thought when his secretary entered the room. It startled him. "Yes," he answered, half annoyed. "Sir, I'm sorry to disturb you, but I have a man on the phone who wants to talk to you." His secretary said, "He says he's a just say 2 more words, and if they aren't important enough to continue, you can hang up. Abel's curiosity got the better of him. Okay, 2 words. Henry Benolini. The temperature in Abel's office dropped. His mind went numb and his jaw froze in a rictus snarl. He wasn't sure if he was even still breathing. Days, weeks, even years could have passed and he wouldn't have known the difference. Are you still there? It was too much for Abel. Fear and rage welled up within him. Zorn. So you do remember me, he said with genuine happiness. I was beginning to worry. The shock wore off. Abel was able to regain his composure. What do you want? Well, Senator, I'm sure you've read the letters I've sent you explaining my current circumstance. I never received any letters from you. Abel lied, looking at the shredder. Really, Mill said. I sent you 3, just to make sure you got them. Frantically searching the stack of mail for the 3rd letter, could not find it. So what did these letters say? They said that I was under hell and may need your help. And since that, I've been found guilty, and I'm going to be sentenced tomorrow. I'm sorry to hear that, said Abel sarcastically. But what does that have to do with me? I want you to get me out. What? Abel shouted. I'm not going to get you out of a punishment you brought on yourself. Oh, yes, you will, Emil said. I will not risk flushing my career down the toilet just to play your game with fire for too long and finally got burned. Let's reminisce, you and I, Emil said calmly. It was, about 2.5 years ago. I've witnessed hundreds, even thousands of inmates come and go through my prison, but not someone like that. He arrived in the dead of night, surrounded as much by mystery as the armed guards that transported him. No name, no questions. He was escorted into the prison and disappeared. He wasn't until later that I found out that he had been taken to an unused section of RHU and kept there by special order. So I made it my business to find out all I could about him. It took months, but I finally found out his name and his crime. That's about the same time that you contacted me through a mutual friend. I remember things about inmate Benelli's one-on-one visit. I remember you bringing your 11-year-old daughter to face her attacker. I remember the look of utter terror in her eyes. I remember you putting a knife in her hands and asking her to extract the type of brutal revenge most adults barely have the stomach for. I remember the look of disappointment in your eyes when your daughter dropped the knife and ran away sobbing. And I remember the hatred and rage that covered your face as you picked up the knife and began to slash his body to pieces. When you were finished, he was an inch from death, and you stood there covered in blood, still holding the knife, but you couldn't deal the final blow, so I did it for you. You argued that it wasn't necessary, but I told you that a man with such information is too dangerous to be left alive. So you're blackmailing me. I could put you away for a long time for that. Emil started laughing. I'm already hearing whispers of the death penalty. What do I care about you putting me away for a long time? I think I'm gonna write a memoir during that time. I think I'll call it The Torture's Apprentice, a day in the life of a senator. What do you got it. He had all he could take. Abel slammed down the receiver so hard that it cracked the plastic. His mind felt like a washing machine on high spin. The intercom beeped. "What?" he shouted. Sir, it's nearly 12. You have a lunch appointment with Senator Graham. Cancel it. I have other things to attend to. Back at Larson Prison, Emil called for the officer and handed him back his cell phone. Thank you very much. No problem, sir. If it weren't for you, I wouldn't have this job. Then he looked quickly around and lowered his voice. And between you and me, I think what you were doing was the right thing. Thank you, officer. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for first thing in the morning. Courtroom was empty, no media or onlookers except for one, Warden Teff. Judge Bradley had personally requested he be there. The judge entered looking tired. He slumped into his chair and stared at the back wall. Finally, the bailiff cleared his throat. Are you alright, Your Honor? He started as though being awakened. I'm fine, thank you. Let's get this over with. He looked at the defendant. Mr. Zorn, please rise. Normally, a guilty charge of multiple murders would command several life sentences, possibly even the death sentence. But due to special circumstances, however, this is not the case today. I am sentencing you to 5 years in prison. The jury gasped collectively, but a withering glare from the judge silenced them. Emil did his best not to show an emotion at all, for fear that the judge might change his mind. Court is adjourned. Bradley said barely above a whisper. Thanks for the vacation. I'll see you real soon. Emil said to Warden Depps. As the room was being cleared, the judge got Deff's attention and motioned him into his chambers. Deff was still standing in the middle of the room, looking uncomfortable. Have a seat, Mr. Deff. Care for a drink? No, thank you, sir. The reason I called you back here is to thank you for helping us out by housing Zorn during this whole mess. No problem. I was glad to help. How long have you worked in corrections? 8 years, sir. How do you feel about our justice system? I don't like the results sometimes, but it's the only system we have. I have been a judge for 42 years. I've seen some of the most incredible miscarriages of justice over the smallest detail. I'm sorry, sir. I tried to do the best I could, Deff said, sensing a rebuke. No, this isn't about you. This is about justice. It may surprise you, but I believe in Mr. Zorn's theory. Criminals don't get the punishment they deserve in most cases. I agree with Zorn's idea of punishment to fit the crime, but he took it too far, and if you and I don't do something about it, he will get away with multiple murders. What are we talking about here, sir? Deff said. I should have retired years ago, he said to himself, more than Deff. Then I wouldn't be here for some snot-nosed senator to threaten my pension. I'm sorry, sir. The judge waved him off. It doesn't matter. What's done is done. Now it's up to you to make it right. Are you asking me to do what I think you are? I'm asking you to do what your conscience tells you to do. I'm officially retiring effective tomorrow. It's up to you to act or not. I'm done with this case, this town, and this state. By next week, I will be living on a fishing boat. Depp got up and started for the door. Enjoy your retirement, he said, and then walked out. Chapter 52. After the hearing, Emil was scheduled to return to another prison in the morning. Warden Deff came to visit him before he person. An officer led the warden into Soren's cell and locked the door behind him. Are you sure that's wise, being locked in here with a dangerous inmate? Dev shrugged off the veiled threat. I handled you once, I can handle you again. I came here to talk to you before you went away. Soren growled. Talk about what? The new fashions on Bravo Block. Dev ignored the baiting. I wanted to know why. Why did you feel it was your right or duty to take the law in your own hands? Soren glared at him. Go away. Answer my question first. Why should I tell you anything? Because you've wanted to. For so long, you've never had an equal. You could tell all this to. It's been underlings following orders. No one to truly listen to let it out. Let me ask you something, Emil said. Did you ever do anything wrong? Ever made a mistake? Sure, my latest one was you just last month, letting you lead me on that stupid masquerade. Looking for a man who didn't exist. as of shadows ended with the light. When the lights came on, Anna's eyes slowly adjusted to the brightness. Recognizing faces right away, dozens, perhaps hundreds of inmates and former inmates filled the room, each one of them then do one-on-one visits. Some were missing an arm, leg, or an eye, but each one was holding a weapon of some sort. Knives, chains, baseball bats, even sledgehammers. It was as if Dante himself had invited him to be the guest of honor in some hellish reunion. Captain Emile Sorn felt no fear or remorse. The thought of begging never once entered his mind. All of his memories, that the one that flashed through his mind was the first day at Larson when he shot inmate Morelli in the chest, knowing that he was dead before he hit the ground. The thought made him grin. He realized on that day he would die in uniform. It just never occurred to him that it would be in an inmate's uniform. He started laughing. He was still laughing as the inmates closed in around him and the first blow fell. An hour later, Warden Deaf made an announcement over the intercom. One-on-one visits are over. Warden Deaf slowly pushed the microphone aside, feeling no anger, no malice, only remorse. The prison remained silent. No one spoke, no one shouted. If anything, a collective sigh of relief was all anyone heard. Colton sat quietly in his cell. His eyes fell to the Bible verse he had been reading. Romans 12:19. Vengeance is mine, I will repay it, said the Lord. He stared at the passage for a long time, then he closed his Bible and leaned against the post of his bunk. As he closed his eyes, a single tear ran down his cheek. The end. Epilogue. She pulled her car to the side of the road, stepped out into a foot of snow, picked up her mail, and continued to the garage. She trudged through the unshoveled snow into the small blue house that was in need of some repairs. She knew it, but was so tired from working a full-time and part-time job just to keep up with the bills. Throwing the mail on the kitchen table turned her thermostat from 62 to 66 just to take the chill out of the air. Her stomach growled. Too tired to cook, she pulled open the freezer and selected an entree of microwavable spaghetti. As expected, there were bills which would have to wait until after payday, and a letter from the law office. She opened it and a piece of paper fell to the floor. She picked it up, laid it on the table. Dear Mrs. McGregor Sorn, we're sorry to hear about your husband's passing. We wish to convey our deepest description